Is the UN doing enough to protect civilians? In the interview, UN Deputy Secretary-General designate Jan Eliasson.
Jan Eliasson, you're going to be taking up your post as Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations in July. Now, you've had a long and distinguished career in diplomacy, and in the last decade or so, that career has been very much associated with a new doctrine in diplomacy, the responsibility to protect. And I'd like you to describe, if you would, for us, that doctrine and how it was applied for the very first time in the crisis in Libya.
The doctrine's main point is that every state, every government has a responsibility to protect its own population from ethnic cleansing and a number of issues, including genocide. This is a very important step forward in putting a stronger responsibility on the state to make sure that those horrible things do not happen. There is also an aspect that the international community has to act when a nation fails to exercise that responsibility. And that means that there should be international action when you see these cases of ethnic cleansing and, of course, genocide. The United Nations adopted this principle in September 2005, after long discussions. It was seen by many as an interference in internal affairs. But it actually has to do with something very basic, that solidarity must not stop at a border, but at human beings in need. And it was accepted and adopted, but it took 6 years until it was for the first time applied.
Which was the Libya conflict.
Which was the Libya situation. And it was an interesting sign that when there were threats to a population and people were called rats and cockroaches, the principle was referred to in a Security Council resolution. And that in itself was a very important step. I would hope that the Libya operation would lead to discussion about the different aspects of how the principle should be applied. There's been criticism of how the operation then was conducted, whether it was within the realm of the principles of the responsibility to protect. I still think it is very important that we maintain this principle of responsibility to protect, and that we also remember that it must always be applied on a collective basis, and that it also contains an element of prevention. The earlier we act, the better.
Absolutely. However, let's talk about the Libya conflict and the aftermath of the Libya conflict, because certainly in the West it was viewed as a resounding success, broadly speaking, and NATO, people at NATO have tended to view it as perhaps the greatest success in the whole history of the military alliance. However, one thing we've seen in Libya is that it's not easy to topple a dictator, but it's far easier to topple a dictator than to replace a dictator. Tell me about that problem.
Well, the principle of responsibility to protect is not meant to achieve regime change. But of course, when it comes to very serious cases of genocide, for instance, but also ethnic cleansing, you have reached such a stage that the issue of the character regime comes up as in the conclusion of this conflict. This we saw in the case of Libya. But what happened was, of course, that several countries in the world, including Russia and China, and also many countries in Africa and Asia, Latin America, felt that perhaps the principle was overused, overutilized, overextended. And this discussion has to take place. I think it would be very sad if, as I say, we throw out the baby with the bathtub water and not realize that we have now a legal norm, or a moral norm at least, in our hands, which is useful and very important to save people in very, very difficult circumstances.
Okay, and when you talk about a moral norm, does that moral norm apply in Syria in the same way that it did in Libya? That's a question that many people are asking.
Yes, all situations differ. You cannot completely copy an action in Libya to an action in Syria. What was different and is different is, of course, that two countries, so Russia and China, have vetoed or threatened vetoes in the Syria situation. But there is also realization among many Western nations, including in the Security Council, that a military solution, quotation marks, is not possible. It is a completely different situation with a military entity in Syria, which is quite different, and it's in a very dangerous neighborhood, so to speak, with Israel and Lebanon right in the neighborhood. So a military solution is not possible. In this situation, then, the Secretary-General has made two very good moves, in my view. He has moved on achieving humanitarian access to very, very difficult area situations, and secondly, he has asked Kofi Annan to work on the political side. And I think all member states, including Russia and China, will cooperate with Kofi Annan. So I think there is a hope that we can achieve progress.
You talk about achieving progress, but for most normal people outside there in the real world, what it looks like is that we've accepted that we can't make much progress through the United Nations. We've sent a special envoy there. Okay, a political process is in motion, but it's almost slow motion. We're sitting on our hands. We're watching the atrocities unravel.
Well, the United Nations will be as strong as the member states allow the United Nations to be. And in this case, you have a role for the United Nations, the humanitarian field. You have a role through Kofi Annan and Secretary-General in the political process. But let's face it, we have also external interests that are at play. You have interests from the Sunni world, you have interests from Iran, you have bilateral relations, Russia, United States, and so forth.
You mentioned the fact that, that Syria is in a dangerous neighborhood, and you touched on Israel, Iran, and that simmering conflict. And, you know, from everything we read and hear at the moment, there's a very serious threat that the Israelis could very well, in the near future, launch some kind of a military strike against Iran because of their fears that Iran is building up a nuclear capacity, a military nuclear capacity. You know, what can we do? That's a disastrous prospect. What can we do to head off that eventuality?
It is indeed a dangerous prospect, and I think what is needed now is to introduce a very serious political and diplomatic element. I would hope that there would be attempts made to freeze the present situation. If there are suspicions, which exist, about Iran going the direction of nuclear weapons, then to achieve a freeze right now where no further steps are taken, and in the meantime negotiate on the future relationship with a nuclear-free Iran, in combination with certain measures in the other direction, on the sanctions side, could lead to a lessening of this tension. Because if we accept that this comes with automaticity, it would be very dangerous. As you said, it could be a disastrous effect for the world.
Okay, here too you're talking about setting a political process in motion, and you know what you're talking about because in the early 80s you visited Iran an awful lot because you were a negotiator in the Iran-Iraq war situation. Yeah? How do you persuade the Iranians to accept that the political process is necessary? Well, you must have incredible insights.
You have domestic political processes in this triangle all over. You have it in Israel, of course. You have domestic pressures in the United States. You have domestic pressures in Iran. And there are very competing groups that are, competing for power and where you do not want to look weak. So there is always, in all situations, diplomacy, a need to create a less tense atmosphere and allow for even some form of face-saving. I think a political process now is possible, but it's late in the day, and I hope the efforts go on right now at this moment.
Okay. We're talking here about conflict prevention in the United Nations Charter. It says that one of the United Nations priorities is to prevent the scourge of war, to protect people from the scourge of war. Just as important, I know for you, is protecting people from the scourge of poverty, and that's where the United Nations Millennium Development Goals come in. Tell us about how that battle, that war on poverty, is going.
A formula adopted in the UN, which was confirmed in 2005, is there is no peace without development. There is no development without peace. And there is no lasting peace or development without respect of human rights. And development is absolutely crucial. The agenda for development has to be taken very seriously for the UN and of the member states of the world. And I think the Millennium Development Goals have played a very important role. Things are going well in a couple of aspects. The sad side is the development on two areas: maternal health and water and sanitation. A glass of water is a luxury for 880 million people. 2.5 billion people don't have access to sanitation. This is the reason why about 3,000 children die every day under the age of 5 because of lack of clean, safe water. This has to be dealt with. This is only one aspect of the kind of goals that we have to establish for 2015 and onwards, so that we keep the momentum of the work for the Millennium Development Goals, but also add dimensions that have to do both with poverty, sustainability, and even rights, the rights perspective. So I would say that if we don't see the totality, peace, development, and human rights belonging together, then I think we will lose the need for a comprehensive, holistic approach to the work of the UN. And only then can we make a real difference for millions of people around the world.
And when we talk about making a real difference, I know that your personal credo is the link up between two terms, passion and compassion.
Yes.
Give me a very quick word on that.
When I was a young man, I read the autobiography of Bertrand Russell, and he talked about his passions in life. And then I thought to myself, it's great because it rhymes in English, these perfect words, passion and compassion. Without passion, nothing happens in life. But without compassion, the wrong things happen. And I think we need that both in the United Nations and in our nation states and perhaps even in our personal lives.
Okay. And just before you go, I'm not going to let you go without asking you one more question. Tell me about what you see as Germany's role on the international diplomatic stage. What is Germany doing that is good and useful, and what could Berlin be doing better?
Germany has a very important role. It's a leading power, leading state in Europe, in the European Union. It has a voice both as Germany, in my view, and as part of the European Union. And I would hope also of the United Nations. So I hope very much to see Germany working on conflict resolution. I hope to see Germany working on development and on human rights. And I look forward to working very closely with my German friends and colleagues in New York and elsewhere.
Jan Eliasson, thank you very much for talking to us today, and I wish you all the very best for your work as United Nations Deputy Secretary-General.
Thank you very much.